Today I'm continuing my discussions of Final Fantasy VIII, and having recently discussed Squall Leonhardt, I'm now turning to take a look at his antagonistic foil and the persistent problem child of Final Fantasy VIII, Seifer Almasy. Now, Seifer has historically received a raw deal from fans, with many finding him difficult to relate to or empathise with, and it's true enough that an uncompromising attitude and relentless hostility are his definitive traits in the game. But I've always felt that Seifer is more than meets the eye, and if we dig a little deeper and look at the subtleties of dialogue and interactions with Seifer, there's a complexity of character at work here that makes him among the most intriguing anti-villains I think we've seen in a Final Fantasy game. Furthermore, as a general narrative device and plot element, Seifer fulfills a character type that I've always loved, which is the grey character, who is a character type that embodies a certain flawed and human foolishness, whether by ambition, hubris or greed, and while they aren't fundamentally bad people, they make quite dubious decisions that starts them on a path to ruin. Anakin Skywalker and Kylo Ren from Star Wars, Malfoy in Harry Potter, Boromir in Lord of the Rings, going all the way back to Shakespeare's King Lear and Greek mythology before that, grey characters have always populated good stories as cautionary tales made all the more tragic because we as an audience can only watch them make these poor decisions that push them towards a point of no return. Seifer is no exception to this, and in this episode we're going to discuss some of the key moments where both his compassion and complexity, but also his flawed decision making shines through, and the reasons as to why that might be. Now, before we delve into Seifer's story, I'd like to begin by noting his significance within the wider game, and how he fits into a recurring Final Fantasy convention when it comes to hero and villain that's often explored in the games. The German term doppelganger is often a word that I use to describe this, and it hints at a look-alike or an inverted version of a person, often associated with an evil twin or bad luck. And I think this is a dramatic convention that Square subtly employs in many of its games, that often reflects elements of the hero in the villain, and roots back to some past event that the hero has to reconcile with, and indeed illustrates some connection and drama that the hero has to overcome with that adversary on a personal level, as well as the macro level of having to save the world from them. Cloud and Sephiroth are a prime example of this, and the Genova cells and the connection they share is explored thoroughly in Final Fantasy VII, culminating in weird moments like Cloud handing over the black materia. In Final Fantasy IX we have Zidane and Kuja, who are Terran clones and essentially genetic duplicates of one another. In Final Fantasy X we have Tidus and Jecht, who are father and son, and in Final Fantasy XV we have Ardyn and Noctis, who are Lucian ancestors who share the unique armature abilities. So we see here that Final Fantasy is rife with this hero-villain connection that drives the game forwards on a personal level as well as on a macro level. Turning to Final Fantasy VIII, Squall doesn't have a personal relationship or emotional investment in the existence of Ultimecia, and although rumours abound that she's Rinoa, no dialogue or story in the game furnishes us with anything that makes Ultimecia meaningful to Squall on a personal level, which is partly why some have criticised her in the past and is a discussion for another day. But if we look instead at Seifer, much like the aforementioned examples, we see this doppelganger and the binary characteristic foil to Squall enter the scene. And indeed, as I've discussed previously when looking at the water metaphor associated with Squall's name and the fire symbolism attached to Seifer during the game, it drives home this binary opposition between them, which combined with the animosity rooted in their past, makes them an excellent pair to periodically clash throughout the game events. The differences between Squall and Seifer are clear, all the way down to these yin and yang aesthetics. The white coat, European appearance, short blonde hair, and Crusader iconography all lean away from the identity of Squall, who dresses in black and has longer, darker hair, fashioned in a slightly more Japanese anime manga style, which immediately polarizes them. Their respective personalities, which I'll touch on shortly, are also polarized, with Seifer defined by wearing his heart on his sleeve for all to see, very open in his emotions and his contempt and his misgivings, and Squall by comparison being defined by bottling up his emotions and leaving his misgivings for his inner monologues. Now, despite these stark differences, Squall and Seifer are also somewhat similar, and in some very subtle ways. In my Squall episode, I discussed how they are both gunblade specialists, they are both ambitious, and they both have a shared history at Adir's orphanage. But on a level beyond this, they have other, more subconscious similarities too. For example, they are both quite dismissive of extroverted, energetic personalities, and particularly Zell at the beginning of the game, with Squall lamenting that they've been teamed together for the Dollet mission, describing him as just loud, and Seifer, of course, frequently hounding Zell for what he regards as his cowardice and adherence to the rules by calling him chicken all the time. Squall and Seifer are also both attracted to Rinoa, with dialogue around Rinoa's previous interactions with Seifer hinting that there was a romance blossoming there, and this is a connection that isn't really developed in the game, and left me wondering if perhaps there was some scrapped storyline between them. But nonetheless, Rinoa is someone that they both desire at various stages of the game, which is interesting, because again, it's this similarity of subconscious attraction. Finally, and perhaps most importantly to both their respective character arcs, is that Squall and Seifer both crave attention from a maternal figure, in the form of Big Sis on the one hand, and Matron or Adir on the other, which develops their insecurities and ambitions in later life, and propels their stories forwards over the course of the game in quite a significant way. And this leads me on to my next discussion point regarding Seifer's narrative arc, which is his dream to be a sorceress's knight. And what I loved about this is that it cleverly correlates to the Laguna dream, where we see Laguna starring in a movie as a sorceress's knight to try and make some money, and we have to fend off a ruby dragon in a rather comical mini-game. When I first played through Final Fantasy VIII, I always felt that this was a pretty random Laguna dream, perhaps thrown in for a bit of comic relief. But several years later the penny dropped as to its significance, and in the same way that it's subtly hinted that Laguna is Squall's father, this dream sequence and Seifer's dream to be a knight are once again the subtle art of showing and not telling that makes Final Fantasy VIII such a brilliant game. The fact Laguna is starring as a sorceress's knight and employs an identical one-handed gunblade stance to the one that Seifer adopts shows that Seifer's dream stems from having watched this movie as a child, encouraging him towards gunblade mastery and his later allegiance to Adir, the sorceress. And although it's down to the player to join the dots and make this connection themselves, it's a great narrative device within Final Fantasy VIII, because it shows how the past actions of Laguna have echoed out and affected so many characters in the contemporary events of the game. And beyond being a slightly amusing sideline that Seifer's life goals have been shaped by Squall's dad, it also brings Seifer more into the central fold, and rather than being this peripheral figure, he is actually closely bound to these fated characters, a fated circle, you might say, who have all been influenced by the actions of Laguna. Now, Seifer's ambitions are hinted at quite early on, and as he recklessly charges towards the communications tower in Dollet, he shouts up to Squall, "One day I'll tell you about my romantic dream." And this dialogue is the intriguing hook which starts building Seifer's intentions, and it also hints at why he ended up falling in with the antagonists in the first place. Several years ago, in my long-form review of Final Fantasy VIII, I made the contention that the core characters as orphans had no structured paternal model to base themselves on, and being thrust into the world without roots and role models, they constructed certain personas for themselves to make up for insecurities that are variously revealed throughout the game. Quistis is introduced to us as a wizened instructor, but quickly loses her license and tells Squall how inept she feels. Irving comes across as a suave, confident ladies' man, but cracks and reveals his fear and cowardice during the assassination mission. And Zell comes across as a brazen, confident martial artist, quick to rely on his fists, but Seifer forever calls him chicken, and we are shown that as a child and as an adult, Zell is very averse to breaking the rules, and I'll explore these respective characters in future episodes. But turning to Seifer, just like the others, he's constructed a persona for himself as a confident, considerably ruthless guy. But unlike the others, rather than quickly confronting this and reconciling with his true self in the game, Seifer goes on to indulge this fabricated illusion and the idea of himself as a sorceress's knight. And this is what proves his road to ruin during game events, aptly conveyed by his increasingly battered and beaten appearances in each successive battle, where his dialogue gradually shifts from confidence to increasingly desperate lines like, "I've gone too far to turn back now." And indeed, while people say that they don't like Seifer, I find myself really sympathising with him, because, going back to the grey character idea, he's not a fundamentally bad person. He's simply a flawed and human character that has always harboured a desire to lead and belong and be a hero, really, which, combined with his rash personality and insecurities, which don't make him a natural leader, leaves him open to manipulation. A prime example of this is when, first confronted by Adir at the TV station, she immediately uses his insecurities to undermine and ensnare him, calling him a poor, poor boy, and noting that he'll leave his childhood behind by going with her. Now, beyond Seifer's ruthless Machiavellian persona, I really liked the depth and complexity they offered his character in subtle ways, and it hints at the, if not camaraderie, then at least the connection he shares with Squall that neither openly addresses during the game events. For example, Seifer confides in Squall about his romantic dream, and more tellingly, during the Dollet mission, he turns to Squall and says, "No turning back now, are you scared too?" which quietly hints at his own fears and insecurities, which aren't all that dissimilar from Squall's, and once again proves a weakness that propels him into the arms of the Sorceress. Likewise, when Seifer's supposed execution is announced, following the botched timber mission, the party console one another, discussing Seifer as one of them, not a bad guy, and so on. And Squall finally snaps and freaks out at the prospect of death, and being considered in the past tense, which I think owes to his similarity and proximity to Seifer as a rival, and it makes it a starker reflection for him, because he sees so much of Seifer in himself, and he perceives that this is how people might respond to his own death. Another intriguing aspect of Seifer is that he holds on to elements of the past that others don't. He refers to Zell as Chickenwuss all the time, which we witness both in childhood flashbacks and in the contemporary events of the game, and he also rebukes Squall at the end of Disc 2, prior to the second Sorceress battle, where he states, "You want to fight Matron after all she's done for us." And where the reveal of the orphanage and the shared history comes to the party during the controversial basketball scene, Seifer obviously wasn't there, so it's interesting to consider how he's either remembered all along, owing to his not having junction GFs or something, or perhaps he's drawn his own conclusions, which further encourages his allegiance towards Adir, and also his antagonism towards Squall and co, because they don't acknowledge or remember this shared history, which would clearly be quite demoralising for someone, such as Seifer. So, I'm going to start wrapping up on Seifer now, and as I've discussed here, I think he's simply an excellent antithesis and symbiotic foil to Squall, who has all the aptitudes of a hero, but lacks the personality and the resolve to deliver on it. Indeed, one thing I've noticed in the game is that Seifer leads the disciplinary committee in Barlam Garden, and also remarks it is not his first rodeo as Squad B captain during the field exam. It's not an accident that Seifer winds up in positions of responsibility, and I personally feel that another subtlety of the game is that Headmaster Sid sees equal potential in both Squall and Seifer, with either of them having the potential to succeed him as a leader. However, the difference between them is, in every opportunity Seifer is offered to prove himself, he illustrates his ineptitudes. He runs the disciplinary committee like a Stalinist dictatorship, keeping records of people who offend him in the list. His tenure as Squad B captain likewise sees him utter phrases along the lines of, "Teamwork means staying out of my way," and he also goes rogue to mount an offensive on the communications tower at the expense of a successful mission. And finally, he brazenly busts out of Garden to kidnap Vinzerdeling at the TV station, in a scene that sees him finally fall into the hands of the Sorceress. On the note of Seifer's arguably preferential treatment within Garden, there has been a lesser-regarded rumour floating around that Cid and Adir are in fact his parents, which would account for his recurring chances at proving himself as a leader, but it would also account for the fact that we win Seifer's triple triad character card from Cid, much like how we win Renoa's character card from General Caraway, her father, and we win Squall's character card from Laguna, his father, which is an interesting observation that has been made in the past. So, to conclude, Squall and Seifer are excellent symbiotic foils to one another, and what Squall gradually discovers in his character arc, and Seifer fails to acknowledge until probably the closing moments of the game, is that respect is earned and not given, and you can't go through life alone, relying only on yourself, and expect to be considered as a leader. But one thing I mentioned in my long-form Final Fantasy VIII review, and is probably my favourite part of the ending FMV, is that rather than giving Seifer a bitter ending and killing him off or something, he's offered the hint of a redemption arc, and as we see Garden flying past overhead, he smiles up at it, finally at peace with his friends Raijin and Fujin. And just as we see Squall smiling for the first time in the ending FMV, so too is Seifer smiling for the first time, which once again concludes on this excellent symbiotic note of similarity and fated connection between these two. So, there we have it. If you're into Final Fantasy VIII and would like to hear my extended thoughts on the game, please check out my Final Fantasy VIII review, which is available on the channel, and I'll provide a link in the description below. And as always, feel free to drop a comment and start a conversation, and hit like, hit subscribe to keep updated with my latest posts.